Abusiemu bi akwaba. Say more ransom ni ye Felix Ofosukwache, Minister of Communication, was granted an interview to Mr. Kwesi Pratt Jr. Na interview no about the first 120 days of President John Dramani Mahama ewo office. Na during this interview no na Kwesi Pratt Jr. ebusa ye Felix Ofosukwache ese nansen won say former Minister of Communication Kojo Oppong has been moving from one radio station to the another, trying to discredit President Mahama. The Ministry of Communication previously known Nedano as they say Felix Nedano. Now Felix Enuai anu ye na Felix ewademano. Nti Felix Ofosukwache ano me o video no ha me video na kire obi no say busa about the 24-hour economy. Yen said the 24-hour economy one of the main policies of President John Dramani Mahama a campaign on it during the 2024 in the run up to the 2024 general election. Kwesi Pratt busa say 24-hour economy no da ben na air started Felix no so ano timensi obi amren mo me go head this interview Felix Ofosukwache grantee to Mr. Kwesi Pratt, one about Kojo Oppong and two about the 24-hour economy.
Yeah, to the people that you are not out there to waste their resources on nothing. If 7 people can do a job, why do you need 106 people? So this is what informed that promise, and this is how it has been done. So I would urge that discussion focuses on the overall achievement, overall efficiency. Designations may change. Some of them may sound funny at first glance, but there's real reason. But overall, if you want to assess whether it was even worth it, reducing government, you look at the numbers, the outputs, and then the savings made thereof. And that is what President Mahama is coming. And he's gone strictly by the team. Constantly reminds us that he's not going to entertain all manner of hangers on and all manner of designations that do not make any sense. Yes, so that essentially is what has happened with the numbers.
Your opponents have gone beyond the numbers, and they are looking at budgetary allocation. They've made heavy weather, out of the budgetary allocation. Yes, the numbers have reduced, but especially Kojo Oppong actually told the media that the monetary allocation is too huge, bigger than what they had.
This is not the case. Again, it is regrettable that Kojo Oppong, who I consider as one of the most enlightened, level-headed people out there would make such arguments, because he of all people should know, because he was the information minister of the previous government, and as a legislator he thinks on his feet, he is sharp, he has access to documentation, and he should know. Some of the information is so basic that I'm surprised that he says he will not know, unless of course it is motivated by political considerations. The first point is that the office of the president is not just one institution sitting there with the president and a few people helping you. For budgetary purposes, every institution has to what the office of the president gets in terms of discretionary expenditure is goods and services and capital expenditure. That is what they choose to do with as they please. And as I speak to you, initially, because government hadn't settled, there were many agencies that didn't have a mother agency. So, for instance, the information ministry was scrapped. So there's no minister, there's no deputy, there's no chief director and directors to handle it. But the agencies that the information ministry had didn't go anywhere because they perform important functions. You are familiar with the ISD and the role they play. Ghana Broadcasting Corporation is an organization that you cannot scrap because they perform an important service. The Ghana News Agency is perhaps one of the most credible news organizations we have. They hardly put a foot wrong, but they are a state-owned enterprise. They fall under the office of information ministry at the time. Once you scrap the ministry, you must put them somewhere. So they come under me. I am at the office of the president, so they will come. Mr. Pratt, these 3 agencies alone came with 2,500 civil servants whose salaries had to be catered for, whose goods and services had to be catered for, whose capital expenditure has to be catered for, as though they were under the previous ministry. National security, they also had a ministry, the Ministry of National Security, but President Mahama does not believe. In fact, the law does not say there should be a ministry. The law actually says there should be these specific agencies, but they don't talk about a ministry. We don't believe that we need a ministry. So, for budgetary purposes, and because we hadn't finished forming government, the agencies under the Ministry of National, it was not enough to meet their needs. But that is what they were given, made up of compensation, salaries, goods and services, capital expenditure. So now, you come to the Office of the President, so there's compensation, which has added to the Office of the President compensation package. Now, GBC, ISD, and Information Services Department need goods and services. So the three of them were given 8 million Ghana cedis to share. In fact, I have the Appropriations Act here. And it is surprising that the very people who sat in Parliament and approved this and saw that, for instance, the Information Service Department had been given about 4.3 million Ghana cedis as goods and services. And indeed, I led the team to go and justify our budget. The Information Service Department came with a bulky document indicating what they needed. In fact, the amount they needed was far more than what they were given. But they were given 4.8 million as goods and services. The Ghana News Agency was also given 4.2 million Ghana cedis as goods and services. If you add this, it's about 8.5 million Ghana cedis. As for GBC, because they generate internal revenue, we allow them to keep it to run their organization. Then the two organizations again were given 70 million Ghana cedis as capital expenditure. Nothing came to my office. Nothing. The administrative expenses of my office is catered for by the chief of staff, which is basic stationery and other things to run the office. Just that. Now, let me give you an idea of why they even needed 70 million. You see, GBC alone, you know, the law mandates that they have a presence in every region. There used to be 10 regions, so they had presence in all those 10 regions. Now, suddenly 6 regions were created, and they are in default of the law. So, to establish a foothold in every region, they need a minimum of 6 million Ghana cedis. So, if you add it up, that's 36 million Ghana cedis. They brought that request. In addition to this, the former government procured 40 information vans, or if you like, cinema vans. You know, the IS used to have these yellow and green vehicles that go to remote communities to show videos on government's achievements and all that. But there are modern versions of these vehicles. The Information Ministry, under the NDP, imported 40. The total cost of those 40 vehicles is 70 million Ghana cedis. And then there's additional duty of 8 million Ghana cedis that has to be paid. As I speak to you, the vehicles are at a bonded warehouse. They were not able to pay before they left. So if the ISD is giving 70 million Ghana cedis, immediately tells you that they don't even have enough to pay for the duty and pay for the amounts involved to clear the vehicles. So that activity alone wipes out the total goods and services and the 70 million given for capital expenditure of all the agencies under the Information Service Department. So if anybody says that I've been given 78 million, you know that it is false. Then finally, Mr. Pratt, Kojo Oppong says that the research department has been given 15 million Ghana cedis, and he interprets that to mean that we have called some people to form an office at the presidency called research department. But I'm surprised, you know that the research department is not that. And you see, what is really surprising is that in 2020, the MPP amended the Security and Intelligence Services Act. If you go to section 12 of that act, they redesignated the BNSs in debt, and we go into this vicious cycle that we are never able to come out of. So we are very mindful of the need to be judicious in the use of public resources, and we are living to that creed.
Well, viewers, we're going to take a short break here. The first 3 months of the Mahama administration, and indeed we are privileged to have with us Honorable Felix Ofosu-Kwakye, who is the spokesperson of the president and indeed head of government communications. Now, sir, you made a lot of noise about 24-hour economy. Where are we?
Well,
have we done anything about it?
Yes,
where are we?
Yes, there's a lot of work that is going on. First of all, the whole idea of a 24-hour economy is to ensure that we expand the base of our economy. We ensure that we engage in more production, first of all, meet our demands, venture into more exports, and then create more job opportunities for our people. Because the latest figures before we came into government showed that there were up to about 2 million unemployed youths. Now, how are you going to be able to find work for them if you are not expanding the existing structures within your economy? So that informed the need to think outside the box and do something out of the ordinary. It's a good thing. I don't think that there's anybody who is opposed to having an economy that runs around the clock. So a lot of work is being done. Mr. Tano, indeed,
some are opposed.
Well, maybe it is for political reasons, but I'm talking about reasonably minded people who are committed.
No, for superstitious reasons.
Well, okay, of course, but those perhaps they require they require a bit of engagement to let them appreciate that no such no such
the gentleman's objection was that witches fly in the night and you can't work in the night.
Well, perhaps the gentleman needs to be engaged, so that he appreciates that. Yeah, okay, witches may fly, but there are ways to still get the job done. So about 2-3 weeks ago, Mr. Tano made a presentation of the work done so far to cabinet. It was impressive, and indeed he also briefed Parliament in the aftermath of the revision of the budget. So Parliament has actually been briefed on what work is being done, and that shows commitment to transparency and bringing everybody on board. So in due course, in a very, very short while, you will find that it is rolled out. When it comes out, you will see that this is a well thought through policy, because it is our flagship economic policy, and we are going to do that in addition to stabilizing the economy.
One of the things that strikes you, immediately hits you in the face, is that if you're going to run a 24-hour economy, the power sector must be up and running.
That is true.
What are you doing about the power sector in order for this project, to be meaningful?
Of course, the power sector is deeply challenged. There was a lot of mismanagement under the previous administration. Indeed, if you speak to the energy minister, Honorable John Jinapo, he will tell you that the power sector is now indebted to the tune of 80 billion Ghana cedis. The ECG alone owes over 60 billion Ghana cedis, arising out of procurement that is not necessary and what have you. When we were living, we had made such substantial investment in power generation that we had far more power that we immediately needed. Indeed, you recall that one of the criticisms that the NPP leveled against us when they took over power is that we had excess capacity, which means that we have far more generation capacity that we needed immediately. The idea was to ensure that we don't wait till we run into shortages before we begin to ramp up generation capacity. It will surprise you to note that as I speak, now demand has met supply. And so we are at equilibrium. So sometimes the slightest increase in demand results in trips, and then you have power going off and all that. So immediately, we need to generate more power. So I'm sure you've heard talk of a second gas processing plant, which will bring in additional gas and make it cheaper to generate power, because the idea is to move to cheaper sources of generation and even renewable energy, which has a cheaper operation and running costs than before. So a lot is being done. On the generation side, we'll ramp it up. We have a track record of having increased generation. We will do so. But more importantly, it is the downstream side that we have often had challenges with the way that ECG is run. The President and the Energy Minister have committed to reforming ECG and removing the bottlenecks that have resulted in this cyclical indebtedness, which has made life very difficult for that organization. Because by all means, there are areas where we have comparative advantage. There is no country that does not import anything. And there are areas where we could, at least in the West African sub-region and beyond, there are things that we can produce and export. Because exports also generate hard currency, which helps you to resolve the pressures that you face with the local currency. So in addition to reduction in imports, increase in exports, and then job creation. Because if a company was running one shift and therefore employed X number of people, the average human body cannot work 24 hours unless you have some extraordinary ability. So maximum 8 hours, between 8 to 5, you are done. When you leave, somebody has to take your place. And I use myself as an example. When I first entered Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, as part of my course, I needed to do internship. So I managed to secure internship at GASM, which was at the time perhaps a monopoly in the cement manufacturing industry. Then I noticed that they ran around the clock in order to be able to meet demand. So as a young chemist, it was my duty to go to the grinding mills to go and pick samples and test whether they meet quality standards. I went to work in the morning at 8, I close at 5. The moment I leave, somebody has to be in the lab the whole night until I return, because I cannot do the 24-hour shift. So I did one shift. Another person came to do the shift. So I come to relieve him. He also comes to relieve me at night. So for a company like that, if they stop production at some point, they incur costs. Because it is cheaper for them to run around the clock, and then they are able to meet demand. So because you need people to run multiple shifts, you need to employ more people. That's why you say 1, 3, 3. It's one job, 3 shifts, done by 3. Even if it is done by 2 people, as against 1, at least you double employment. So that is how you measure the effect. It's not just that, it's not that we want people to operate at night with the same numbers, otherwise there will be no point. So these are tangible measuring indicators that should tell you whether we are making some progress. Of course, we don't say that it will overnight overhaul everything in this country, but we will see clear improvements. And then, of course, if that kind of production is happening, the import dependence is reduced, the businesses that operate also generate more revenue. There are people who have some extra money. They don't readily have investment options. So they say that, well, as for government, if you lend it money, by all means they will pay. Maybe there are delays, but they will pay eventually. So there's a lot of security in government financial instruments. And then there are commercial lenders, some of whom are outside this country and operate within the World Economic Order. And then there are bond markets. So we borrow from these sources. Now, the moment these people see that you are reaching a threshold where you cannot pay the debts you are taking, they begin to shut shop and begin to make demands of you to pay back. And therefore, it puts pressure on your economy, especially your currency. And so you recall that the Bank of Ghana itself said that between 2022 and 2023, $6 billion dollars was spirited out of this country to pay investors who were demanding their money. So it got to a point where these investors wouldn't do any business with us, and they were demanding their money, and we simply didn't have the capacity to pay under the previous government. So they had to go to the IMF. So the IMF will hold their hand and go basically to beg these investors to give us some time. Now the investors also say, okay, IMF, okay, you are known to be a Bretton Woods institution. I mean, despite all the criticism against them over the years and all that, if you say we should have some patience for this people and accept haircuts, in other words, reduce the interest that they should have paid and extend the maturity periods, then give us guarantees that these people will manage the economy well, so that they don't come and tell us tomorrow again that they are going to default. So that is where the conditionalities come in. You can't do this, you can't do that, net freeze, you must have a surplus, your inflation must be this, your debt ratio high. So that is what happens. If we were managing our affairs well as a country, we won't need the IMF. We won't need them to impose conditionality so that we can do what we think is necessary for our people. So the fundamental problem we've had over the decades, and why the IMF constantly comes in, apart from the unjust and unfair World Economic Order, because the IMF too, they are not for that reason. They don't come here for charity reasons. They and the World Bank, they also lend money, and you pay. Sometimes at cut-throat rates, even if theirs is slightly cheaper than other commercial lenders. The fundamental problem has been fiscal indiscipline, recklessness, especially when elections are drawing close. Because in a year, you collect a certain amount of money. And in fact, even in our personal life, if you live beyond your means, you're always going to be in debt. So you earn 1,000 cedis, you have to spend 5,000 cedis every month. You borrow in order to be able to meet that expenditure. So you always owe 4,000. The next 1,000 you get, you must go and pay. So you are always in debt. So the fundamental principle, the reason why we've done all the cuts in government expenditure is to ensure that we don't slip back onto that path of fiscal recklessness, so that we don't continue to incur debts that we can't pay and go and invite the IMF. That's the first principle. The second principle is that we must look inward and see how we can grow our economy organically through the work that is done in the various sectors. So agriculture, industry, services, including telecommunications, the new frontier in technology. What can we do to ensure that we are self-reliant? We rely on ourselves so that we don't have to go and rely on others. And then when we have generated the resources, how do we spend it so that we continue to sustain ourselves? What do we spend on? Are we going to reinvest in the productive sector? Are we going to invest in agriculture, in industry, in services, for job creation, and what have you? Oil in 2007. And then suddenly a spending splurge occurred. We found oil, so we need to spend. That must be kept. If you are spending, where are you putting it? How much of your budget is going to education? How is the basic education system like? The secondary school education, is it just populist recitals or slogans, free SHS? What really does it entail? In fact, the world is evolving. How are we positioning ourselves so that we can compete? When our children come out of school, do they have the same knowledge base as their counterparts in China, in Singapore, and elsewhere? So all these things feed into government policy. We have just begun to roll out, and as time elapses, we are going to ensure that we change. But at least by the end of the 4 years, there should be a complete departure from the things that the previous government did that put us in this. And then, whatever gains are made, we build on the subsequent governments.
Honorable, your minister for local government is indicating very, very strongly that your stance on the National Cathedral has changed. Has it changed?
No, as far as I know, I'm not. To be honest with you, I've not heard exactly what the local government minister said. So perhaps I may have
well,
to.
He's saying that the cathedral is not such a bad project and that it may be continued, and that those who don't understand it and will make noises will be challenged.
Well, I speak for the president, so it is the president's view and position that can express. To begin with, if Christians, churchgoers, or any religious organization decides that they can mobilize their own resources and build a cathedral, I don't think anybody would have qualms with that. Indeed, some of the most spectacular auditoriums and buildings we have in this country are churches who are quarreled with the Action Chapel Church on the Spinters Road, or Dagwood Moses Church in the industrial area, or wherever.
Except that the minister speaks for government.
Yes, but again, who has the final say in government? It's the president. It's an executive presidency. What has the president said? That for me, without prejudice to listening to what the local government minister said, I can only express the view of the president. As far as I know, President Mahama's position is that not a dime, not a cedi of public funds will go into the cathedral. He said that clearly on the campaign platform. You recall that even this whole cathedral, when it started, the rendition was that the president said he had gone to have a dream or a vision or some encounter with God, and therefore had promised to build a cathedral in the event that he won. So he won. But he told us that it was the churches who were going to finance the project, and that what government was going to do is that the churches had requested land. Government can give them land. And then in the 2018 budget or so, the finance minister said, oh, government was going to support with 10 million. I doubt if people would have raised too much crops, even if you had misgivings. Well, okay.
For which he was attacked. And he's saying that there's no need to prosecute foreigners who are caught engaged in galamsey. Is that the official position?
Again, when I heard this, I engaged the interior minister to clarify the position. What exactly is the issue that he raised? And the sense I get is that perhaps it didn't come out the way he wanted it to come out. And he told me, he made the point that what he meant was that we need to study this matter on a case-by-case basis. If there are people like Aisha Kwan, whether they are Chinese or Ghanaian or Egyptian or what have you, who are the main brains behind this thing, financiers, the pivot around which this environmental terrorism occurs, by all means they have to be prosecuted. There's no two ways about it. And therefore, it remains the policy of this government that people like that will be prosecuted without question, without ambiguity. There are times when you get huge numbers of foreign nationals. Indeed, you recall that when President Mahama was first president, between 2013 and 2017, about 5,000 Chinese were deported. If you get huge numbers like that, you can make a decision as a country. What do we do with these huge people? These are not the main pushers